The gates of the De Luca mansion opened just before sunset, and the man everyone once feared returned without a single word. Lorenzo De Luca, the ruthless mafia boss who had ruled the underworld for more than a decade, sat motionless in a wheelchair. His eyes stared into nothing. The doctors had declared him permanently blind and paralyzed after a devastating attack. Within the first hour, whispers spread through the mansion like wildfire. His fiancée quietly slipped off her diamond engagement ring. Trusted associates suddenly found excuses to leave. Allies who had sworn lifelong loyalty stopped answering their phones. Only Nora Whitmore, the plus-size maid, gently tucked a blanket over his legs and whispered, "Dinner is ready whenever you are." She believed he could neither see nor move. She had no idea Lorenzo witnessed every tear she secretly wiped away, and every betrayal unfolding before him. The morning after Lorenzo De Luca returned to his mansion, the atmosphere inside the estate changed completely. Only 24 hours earlier, this had been the command center of one of the most powerful mafia organizations in the country. Every hallway had been filled with armed guards, advisors, accountants, and captains waiting for Lorenzo's orders. Now the mansion felt strangely quiet. The official medical report had spread throughout the underworld before sunrise. Lorenzo De Luca, the feared mafia boss whose name alone could end negotiations or start wars, had supposedly lost both his eyesight and the use of his legs forever. No one questioned whether the report was true. Instead, everyone began asking the same question. Who would control the De Luca empire now? Luxury cars arrived outside the mansion throughout the morning. Family captains entered the estate. Corporate lawyers followed. Senior advisors quietly gathered inside the conference room. Almost none of them went upstairs to visit Lorenzo. Instead, they began discussing what would happen after his fall. The first to speak was Victor Grayson, Lorenzo's longtime business partner and the executive who managed the De Luca family's network of legitimate companies. For years, Victor had publicly called Lorenzo his closest friend and most trusted ally. This morning, his loyalty disappeared. "We cannot allow the organization to appear weak," Victor said calmly as he looked around the table. "Our competitors are already watching us. We need someone capable of making decisions immediately." Several captains exchanged silent glances. No one defended Lorenzo. Another voice joined the conversation. It belonged to Alessandro Moretti, one of the senior mafia captains responsible for overseeing the family's security operations across 3 major cities. "If Lorenzo can no longer lead," Alessandro said, "then we should divide responsibilities before chaos begins." One suggestion quickly became another. Control of the ports, control of the casinos, control of the shipping routes. Within minutes, men who had spent years building Lorenzo's empire beside him were calmly discussing how to divide it among themselves. Upstairs, Lorenzo remained perfectly still in his wheelchair near the bedroom window. His expression never changed. Hidden beneath the armrest of the wheelchair was a miniature listening device installed before his return to the mansion. Every conversation downstairs reached him clearly. Every excuse, every betrayal, every ambitious plan. He listened without moving a single muscle. Shortly before noon, another visitor arrived. Vivian Ashcroft, Lorenzo's elegant fiancée and the daughter of an influential political family, entered his bedroom, carrying a bouquet of white orchids. Their engagement had dominated newspaper headlines only 2 months earlier, and everyone believed she would one day become the queen beside the most powerful mafia boss in the country. She placed the flowers beside the bed. "I'm sorry this happened to you," she whispered. For several seconds, she pretended to wipe away tears. Then her expression changed. "I've postponed the wedding." Lorenzo remained motionless. Vivian sighed softly. "I never imagined our future would look like this." Believing he could neither see nor react, she removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger. She gently placed it on the bedside table. I deserve a different life. Without looking back, she picked up the framed engagement photograph from the nightstand and slipped it into her handbag before quietly leaving the room. Lorenzo heard the frame disappear inside the leather bag. His heartbeat never changed. The silence hurt less than the certainty. Late that afternoon, the bedroom door opened once again. This time, it was Nora Whitmore, the mansion's plus-size maid, a woman who had worked for the DeLuca household for nearly 4 years. Unlike the senior staff, Nora had never attended family meetings or handled important business. Her job was simple: prepare rooms, serve meals, and quietly care for the people living inside the mansion. She carried a tray with homemade soup, warm bread, and a cup of chamomile tea. As she placed the tray beside Lorenzo, she noticed the empty space where the engagement photograph had once stood. She paused. A shadow crossed her face. Without saying a word, she walked back downstairs. Several minutes later, she returned holding a small vase filled with fresh white lilies, picked from the mansion's garden. She carefully placed them where the photograph had been. "I thought the room shouldn't feel so empty," she said with a gentle smile. She adjusted the blanket over Lorenzo's legs, making sure he looked comfortable, before quietly leaving the room. She never realized that Lorenzo's eyes followed every movement she made. For the first time since beginning his 30-day test, Lorenzo stopped thinking about those. 3 days passed. The DeLuca mansion continued to operate as if its master had already become a memory instead of a living man. Every morning, servants walked more quietly through the halls. Conversations stopped whenever they passed Lorenzo's bedroom, not out of respect, but because no one believed there was any reason to speak to a man who could neither see nor respond. Only one routine never changed. At precisely 7 o'clock every morning, Nora Whitmore knocked softly on Lorenzo's bedroom door before entering with breakfast. She never skipped a day. She would open the curtains just enough to let the warm morning sunlight fill the room. She would replace yesterday's flowers with fresh ones from the mansion's garden. Then she would gently say the same words every morning. "Good morning, Mr. DeLuca. It's another beautiful day." She knew he never answered. She greeted him anyway. Lorenzo watched every movement through half-closed eyes. She wasn't performing for anyone. No cameras, no witnesses, no chance of earning praise. Her kindness existed only because she believed someone still deserved it. One morning, Nora noticed that his hands looked unusually cold. Without thinking, she removed her own knitted gloves and carefully slipped them over his fingers. "They're a little too big for me," she whispered with an embarrassed smile. "They'll keep your hands warmer." Lorenzo almost reacted. It took every ounce of discipline not to move. No one had touched him with genuine care since the day he returned. Later that afternoon, Nora wheeled him into the mansion's winter garden. The roses had begun to bloom, filling the air with a light fragrance. She picked up a novel from the small wooden table beside the bench. "I know the doctors said you can't see anymore," she said gently, "but maybe stories don't need eyes." She began reading aloud. Sometimes she laughed quietly at funny lines. Sometimes she stopped to explain a character she thought might be confusing. When the story became emotional, her own voice trembled. She treated Lorenzo as though he were still completely present. Not because she expected a response, because she refused to believe that silence meant someone had stopped feeling. Watching her, Lorenzo found himself forgetting the purpose of his 30-day deception. This had begun as a test, a calculated operation designed to expose disloyal captains before they could destroy the DeLuca family from within. Instead, he was learning something he had never expected. No one had ever spoken to Lorenzo DeLuca this way. People obeyed him, feared him, negotiated with him, needed him. But Nora, she simply cared about him. Not the empire, not the money, not the name. Just the man sitting in the wheelchair. Meanwhile, Events beyond the bedroom walls continued to grow darker. Victor Grayson met almost daily with Alessandro Moretti, the veteran captain responsible for coordinating security across the DeLuca territories. Together they quietly contacted several regional mafia leaders, claiming they were preparing an emergency succession plan to protect the family. In reality, they were preparing to remove Lorenzo permanently. Another absence also began to trouble Lorenzo. Matteo Russo, the commander of Lorenzo's personal security team and the man who had protected him for more than 10 years, had not visited the mansion once since the supposed accident. Among all his men, Matteo had always been considered the most loyal. His disappearance raised a painful question. Had even Matteo abandoned him, or was something else happening? The uncertainty lingered in Lorenzo's mind longer than any betrayal. That evening, Nora returned, carrying a tray with grilled chicken, vegetables, and a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea. She paused after setting everything on the table. "I remembered Edgar telling me this was your favorite." She smiled shyly. "I hope I brewed it correctly." She carefully lifted the cup toward Lorenzo's lips, believing she was helping a man who could no longer feed himself. As she did, a quiet voice interrupted them. It was Celeste Rowan, one of the senior housemaids who supervised the domestic staff. Unlike Nora, Celeste had worked in wealthy households for years and believed status determined a person's worth. She stood in the doorway with folded arms. "Still wasting your time," she scoffed. "He can't even thank you." Nora lowered the cup. "He still deserves to be treated with kindness." Celeste laughed. "Kindness won't pay your bills." After a brief silence, she added coldly, "I heard management is reducing staff next month. If I were you, I'd spend less time taking care of a fallen king and more time protecting my own job." She walked away before Nora could answer. Nora remained standing in silence. Then she looked back at Lorenzo. "I suppose she's right," she admitted with a tired smile. "But I couldn't live with myself if I left someone alone just because life became difficult." She adjusted the blanket across his knees one last time before turning off the bedroom light. Outside the room, she quietly wiped away a tear no one was supposed to see. She never realized that Lorenzo saw it. And for the first time in many years, the man who had built an empire through fear found himself wishing he could stand up, if only to tell one ordinary woman that she no longer had to carry the weight of the room alone. A full week had passed since Lorenzo DeLuca returned to the mansion. Outside, the empire continued moving without its leader. Inside, something else was quietly changing. Every morning, Nora still appeared with breakfast before anyone else entered the room. Every evening, she was the last person to leave. She never complained. She never asked for recognition. And she never realized that the man she believed was blind had begun memorizing every small kindness she showed him. One rainy afternoon, Nora wheeled Lorenzo into the mansion's glass conservatory so he could feel the weather. She smiled awkwardly. "I know you can't see the rain, but maybe you can still hear it." She left the windows slightly open. Raindrops tapped gently against the glass roof. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them moved. It was the first moment of quiet Lorenzo had enjoyed in years. Then the peace was shattered. Celeste Rowan entered the conservatory, carrying a stack of clean towels. She stopped the moment she saw Nora. "There you are!" Her voice was sharp enough to echo through the room. "The guest suites still haven't been cleaned." "I'm sorry," Nora replied quickly. "Mr. DeLuca needed to come outside for some fresh air." Celeste rolled her eyes. "He doesn't even know where he is." "You've spent half your shift babysitting someone who doesn't even realize you're here." Nora lowered her head. "I'm almost finished." "No." Celeste stepped closer. "You're already finished." She pulled a folded document from her apron and dropped it onto Nora's lap. It was the weekly payroll report. Across the page, one line had been marked in red. Salary adjustment. Nora's monthly wages had been reduced. She stared at the paper in confusion. There must be some mistake. There isn't. Celeste crossed her arms. The estate manager says you've neglected your assigned duties. You spend too much time taking care of Mr. DeLuca, so your hours have been reassigned. Nora looked at the number again. Nearly a third of her income was gone. For several seconds, she simply stared at the page. Lorenzo watched everything. His hands tightened almost imperceptibly beneath the blanket. He wanted to stand. He wanted to speak. Instead, he remained perfectly still. Celeste leaned closer. You still have time. Stop wasting your life on a man whose empire is already collapsing. He won't even remember your name. Without another word, she walked away. Silence filled the conservatory. Nora quietly folded the payroll report. She took a slow breath. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she refused to cry in front of someone she believed had already lost everything. She pushed Lorenzo's wheelchair back toward the mansion. It's all right, she whispered. I'll find another way. That evening, Lorenzo overheard another conversation through the hidden transmitter inside his wheelchair. Victor Grayson had invited several senior captains to a private dinner. Also present was Alessandro Moretti, but there was one empty chair. It belonged to Matteo Russo. Victor frowned. Still no word from him? Alessandro shook his head. He disappeared 3 days ago. Victor's expression hardened. If Matteo remains loyal to Lorenzo, he becomes a problem. Lorenzo listened carefully. That single sentence answered one important question. Matteo had not joined the conspiracy. But where was he? For the first time since the test began, Lorenzo found himself hoping someone had remained loyal besides Nora. Later that night, Nora returned with a small paper bag. She thought Lorenzo was asleep. She quietly removed a tiny box from inside. It contained herbal medicine. She placed it beside his bed. I asked 3 pharmacies before I found this. The pharmacist said it might help with muscle pain. She laughed softly. I know the doctors probably know better, but I wanted to try anyway. Lorenzo knew exactly what that medicine cost. It was expensive, far beyond what someone earning Nora's salary should have been buying, especially after today's pay cut. He remembered the payroll report. She had less money. Yet, she spent what little she had on someone everyone else had abandoned. She adjusted his blanket one last time. Believing he had fallen asleep, she sat quietly beside the bed. The room remained silent for nearly a minute. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke the words Lorenzo would remember for the rest of his life. Even if the whole world leaves you, I won't. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away before anyone could ever see it. Anyone except Lorenzo. For 8 days, he had convinced himself this was simply a mission, a carefully designed trap to expose traitors. Now, for the first time, he realized the mission had changed. He was no longer testing the people around him. He was testing his own heart. And he wasn't sure how much longer he could pretend to be the broken man sitting in that wheelchair. The 10th day of Lorenzo DeLuca's 30-day test began with an announcement that sent a wave of tension through the mansion. An emergency council meeting had been called. Every mafia captain, legal advisor, financial director, and senior member of the DeLuca organization had been ordered to attend. Officially, the meeting was described as a discussion about the family's future. Unofficially, everyone knew its true purpose. They were gathering to replace Lorenzo. By mid-morning, the mansion's grand council chamber was filled. Victor Grayson sat confidently at the head of the long mahogany table, behaving less like a business partner and more like a man who already believed the empire belonged to him. Beside him sat Alessandro Moretti, whose influence over the family's security network made him one of the most dangerous men in the room. Vivian Ashcroft also attended. Although she no longer wore Lorenzo's engagement ring, she carried herself with the confidence of someone determined to erase every trace of her former relationship before witnesses. Only one chair remained empty. It belonged to Matteo Russo. The absence was noticed by everyone. Victor glanced toward the door before beginning. "We've waited long enough. Lorenzo can no longer lead this family. Our enemies are becoming bolder every day. If we hesitate, we lose everything." Several captains nodded. One by one, they voiced their support. Some spoke about stability. Others spoke about protecting the organization. Not one of them mentioned loyalty. Upstairs, Edgar Holloway quietly entered Lorenzo's bedroom. "The meeting has begun, sir." Lorenzo gave no response. Edgar lowered his voice. "Nora insists on taking you downstairs." Moments later, Nora appeared beside the wheelchair. She had clearly rushed there. A loose strand of hair had escaped from beneath her neatly tied bun, and there was flour on one sleeve of her uniform from helping in the kitchen before hearing the announcement. "They shouldn't decide your future without you," she said softly. "I know you can't speak for yourself, so I'll stay beside you." She slowly pushed the wheelchair into the council chamber. The room fell silent. Some of the captains looked away. Others stared with open pity. Victor barely hid his irritation. "This meeting is for family leadership." "Nora," he said coldly, "take him back upstairs." She tightened her grip on the wheelchair. "No." The single word surprised everyone. Victor's expression darkened. "You are a maid. You have no place here." Nora took a nervous breath, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. DeLuca built this family. He deserves the dignity of hearing what is being decided." Vivian let out a quiet laugh. "Hearing? He can't even see who's speaking." A few people around the table chuckled. Nora looked at them in disbelief. "He trusted all of you." The laughter stopped. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Victor finally stood. His patience was gone. "This meeting is over for you." He gestured toward the guards. "Remove her." Two security men stepped forward. Before they reached the wheelchair, Alessandro impatiently shoved Nora aside. She lost her balance. The tray of documents she had been carrying scattered across the polished floor. She hit the marble hard enough for the sound to echo through the chamber. No one moved to help her. For one long second, the room was completely silent. Then something impossible happened. The wheelchair moved. At first, only a few inches. Several people frowned. Then Lorenzo slowly placed both feet on the floor. One hand released the armrest, then the other. He rose. Not quickly, not dramatically. Slowly, calmly. As though every movement carried the weight of everything he had witnessed during the past 10 days. The room froze. Vivian's face turned pale. Victor instinctively stepped backward. Alessandro stared in disbelief. No one spoke. Lorenzo walked directly toward Nora. Without looking at anyone else, he extended his hand. "Are you hurt?" Nora looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. She couldn't answer. She simply shook her head. Only after helping her to her feet did Lorenzo finally turn toward the table. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Thank you." The room remained silent. Victor blinked. "What?" Lorenzo looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every person who had abandoned him. "Thank you. Because now, I finally know who deserved to stay." He paused. "And who never did." Before anyone could react, the council chamber doors opened once more. Every head turned. Matteo Russo walked inside. The commander of Lorenzo's personal security detail had finally returned. For a split second, even Lorenzo's supporters looked confused. Matteo crossed the room without expression. He stopped beside Victor. A murmur spread through the chamber. Had Matteo betrayed Lorenzo too? Victor smiled for the first time all morning. I knew you'd make the right choice. Matteo remained silent. Then he slowly placed a black briefcase on the conference table. He opened it. Inside were dozens of documents, bank transfers, recorded conversations and signed agreements. Evidence gathered over the previous 10 days. Every secret meeting, every payment, every conspiracy. Matteo looked directly at Victor. I wasn't choosing your side. I was collecting proof. Victor's smile disappeared. Lorenzo quietly folded his hands behind his back. The test he had begun to expose traitors had finally reached its end. But standing beside Nora, he realized something far more important. He no longer cared who wanted his empire. He cared only about protecting the one person who had stood beside him when she believed he had nothing left to offer. The emergency council ended before noon. Victor Grayson and Alessandro Moretti were arrested after Matteo Russo handed the authorities and the remaining family captains months of financial records, secret recordings, and signed agreements proving they had conspired to seize control of the De Luca empire. Vivian Ashcroft quietly left the mansion without saying goodbye. No one tried to stop her. For Lorenzo, the 30-day test had achieved its original purpose. He had uncovered every traitor. Yet strangely, he barely thought about them anymore. His mind kept returning to one person, Nora Whitmore. Life inside the mansion slowly returned to normal. Servants smiled again. The halls were filled with voices once more. Lorenzo resumed leading the organization, although those closest to him noticed something had changed. He spoke more softly. He listened more carefully. And for the first time in years, fear was no longer the only thing people associated with the name Lorenzo De Luca. 3 days later, Edgar Holloway knocked gently on Lorenzo's office door. "There is something you should know, sir." Lorenzo looked up. Nora has submitted her resignation. For the first time in days, genuine surprise crossed Lorenzo's face. "Why?" Edgar hesitated. "She said, her work here is finished." Without another word, Lorenzo stood and walked quickly through the mansion. He found Nora in the servants' courtyard, carrying a small suitcase. She wore the same simple coat she had arrived in 4 years earlier. Nothing expensive, nothing elegant, just the belongings of someone preparing to begin again somewhere else. She smiled politely when she saw him. "I'm glad you're well, Mr. De Luca. I came to thank you for everything." Lorenzo looked at the suitcase. "You're leaving?" She nodded. "You don't need me anymore. The mansion has recovered." "You've recovered? I was only here because someone had to stay." Lorenzo reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. From it, he removed a neatly folded white handkerchief. Nora frowned. She recognized it immediately. It was the same handkerchief she had secretly used to wipe away her tears beside his bed on the 8th night. She had believed no one had ever seen it. Lorenzo carefully placed it into her hands. "I've been meaning to return this." Nora stared at him in confusion. "You saw that?" A gentle smile appeared on Lorenzo's face. "I saw everything." The realization left Nora speechless. Every breakfast, every flower, every story she had read aloud, every tear she had tried to hide, every sacrifice she thought no one would ever know about. Lorenzo took one slow step closer. "You know the strangest part?" She looked into his eyes. "I pretended to be blind, but you were the one who helped me see." A tear escaped before Nora could stop it. Lorenzo continued. "I pretended I couldn't walk, yet you carried me through the hardest days of my life." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The courtyard was completely quiet. Finally, Lorenzo extended his hand. "Stay." Nora looked at him without moving. He smiled. "Not as my maid. Not because you feel responsible for me, but because you're the only person who stayed when you believed I had nothing left to give." Nora laughed softly through her tears. "I almost hated you for pretending. I know, You made me cry more than anyone ever has. I know. She shook her head with a smile. And somehow, I'm still standing here. Lorenzo chuckled. I'm hoping you keep standing here. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Just as their fingers intertwined, Edgar appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. He cleared his throat with the faintest smile. Dinner is ready whenever you are. Lorenzo and Nora looked at each other before laughing quietly. It was the same simple sentence Nora had whispered on the day everyone else had abandoned him. Back then, she believed she was caring for a man who had lost everything. She never imagined she had helped him find the one thing money, power, and fear could never buy. A heart he could trust, and a future worth walking toward together.